This is lesson 3 of the climate unit. In this lesson, we'll be learning how to interpret climographs. So here's a climograph that has a temperature curve way up here that is fairly flat. It has a bump in the middle, which tells me I'm in the northern hemisphere because that's the highest temperatures are happening in June, July, and August. If I look over here, I find the 0. That's our freezing point, and I notice that my temperatures are all well above 0. This is not a climate that ever has winter. In fact, it never gets below freezing. And if I look at how high the temperature is, 20 to 25 degrees, 30 degrees Celsius, that's hot. That's in the 70s and 80s, and it's hot all year. So this is not a climate that has 4 seasons like we might see in New York. It really only has one season, and that would be all summer. Then I can look at the precipitation bars, which are here, and I notice that the months in the winter, January through April and even November, December, are lower precipitation, fairly dry. And then here in the summer and early fall has higher precipitation. So now the question is, where might that climate be? So I want to go through my climate factors. Elevation is going to be a tough one because I don't have any information on elevation there. Latitude, though, because it's so warm for most of the year, I think latitude would be an important climate factor. And because it's so warm, that would tell me that I must be near the equator, or certainly not near the poles. So I'm going to look for a location that is near the equator in the northern hemisphere. So then I don't have any information on ocean currents. And because the curve is so flat, that also tells me that I'm near a large body of water. Why does it tell me that? Because remember that being close to a large body of water makes for a very small temperature range between winter and summer. If I were in the middle of a continent, I would have a much bigger change between the winter and summer months. So I can feel fairly confident that this one must be near water and fairly far south, which would make this choice down here, which is Key West, Florida, probably the best choice for that climograph. Here's one that also has a fairly flat shape to the temperature curve. It does still have a bump in the summer months, so this is also likely to be in the northern hemisphere. I go to my 0 temperature, and again, I'm well above 0 all year long, so this is not a climate that has a severe winter, never gets down to freezing. But unlike the other one, it's not that warm either. It's only between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius, so in the 50s and 60s all year long. So this is not a climate that has 4 seasons either, but this is not summer all year. This is more like spring all year. And if I look at the precipitation data, I have 2 distinct seasons. A wet season in the fall and winter, and a very dry season in the summer months. Notice July, I don't have any rain at all, hardly any in June and August. So this is really a 2-season wet, dry sort of climate that is fairly cool all year long. Again, I would guess that this is close to a large body of water because I'm not seeing a big change between winter and summer temperatures. So what would be a good choice for this one? So not too far south. Okay, so Caracas, Venezuela might be too far south. It should be warmer than that if I were in Caracas. Washington, D.C. probably gets colder and has more of a winter close to freezing temperatures in the winter and certainly gets warmer than 50 to 60 degrees in the summertime. So probably not Washington, D.C. And Dallas, Texas, probably a lot warmer there also than I'm seeing here. So I'm going to go with San Francisco. This is a classic Mediterranean climate that has very dry summers, wet winters, and a cool temperature all year round. Okay, this one looks quite different. It too has a really big bump in the middle, so I'm definitely in the northern hemisphere. But notice that here's my zero. If I go across here, more than half of my year here is below freezing. So this is a climate that has a very severe winter. And if I look at the summertime high, I'm only at about 15 degrees, which is not that warm. So maybe in the 60s. So a cool summer, an extremely cold winter, and a big range in temperature. So this tells me I probably am fairly far north to get these cold temperatures, but I'm also probably in the interior of a continent, not near a large body of water, because I have a big range between winter and summer temperatures. If I look at my precipitation, it's fairly dry, actually, most of the year. So where might this be? Well, these choices here could be Denver, could be Kansas City, Portland, Oregon, or Fairbanks, Alaska. And because it's so cold, I'm going to go with Fairbanks, Alaska for this one. Now here's one that also has the bump in the middle. It has sort of an intermediate range. It's not flat, but it's not a really big change between winter and summer temperatures. I'm definitely northern hemisphere, but I'm here at the zero line. I'm way above zero. So again, this is not a climate that has a severe winter. And if I look down here, June, July, August, September, October, no rain at all. And even in January, February, when they do get some rain, it's very, very small. So the temperature puts me in a warmer sort of location, so probably latitude, maybe one that's not too far north. And maybe I'm not in the middle of a continent, but also maybe not quite at the ocean either, because I do see some change between winter and summer. But the really dry characteristic of this climate, what are the two factors that make my climate dry? I could be on the leeward side of a mountain range, or I could be in one of the dry wind belts, which would be my 30 degrees or my 90 degrees wind belts. So given that it's so warm, I'm going to eliminate 90 degrees, and I would say this is perhaps on the leeward side of a mountain range at a latitude of approximately 30 degrees to put it in the dry, sinking air wind belt. So what are my choices here? Chicago, Jacksonville, Florida, Panama, or Phoenix? Well, Chicago would definitely have a colder temperature and a much bigger temperature range because it's in the middle of the continent. Jacksonville, Florida should have it warm, but because I'm closer to water there, it would probably be a milder climate, a flatter curve. Panama, even closer to the equator, hotter. And so I'm going to go with Phoenix because Phoenix is on right around the 30 degree latitude line, which would make it in the dry wind belt. And it's also on the leeward side of a bunch of the mountains that we have out here out west. We have Rockies, we have the Basin and Range, we have the Sierras. So I'm going to go with Phoenix for that one. Okay, so you can probably get the idea now of how to do these. So we'll look for the 0. This one definitely has months where it's below 0, so I have a real winter. I have a pretty good range in temperature here, so I'm probably not right at a large body of water. My summertime high is around 20 degrees, so in the 70s, 60s, 70s. Fair amount of rain, particularly in the summertime. So what might be my options for this one? Oh, and again, definitely in the northern hemisphere. I see the hump in the summer months. Los Angeles, Houston, Texas, Nassau, or Wisconsin? Well, because of the big change in temperature, the range between the hot and cold seasons, I'm going to say this one is not near a large body of water, and all of these are near water. So I'm going to have to go with Wisconsin. Plus, Wisconsin is far enough north to get a real winter, whereas none of these locations would have the cold winter months either. So I think that one is Wisconsin. I just want to show you what it would look like if you had a climograph from the southern hemisphere. Again, we have the precipitation on the bottom, but you'll notice that my temperature curve now, instead of having a bump in June, July, August, now has a dip. And that's because June, July, and August are wintertime in the southern hemisphere. These are their cold weather months. And so that's one easy way to tell which hemisphere you're in. Do you have a dip in June, July, and August, or do you have a bump? In this case, the dip means I'm in the southern hemisphere. This one, by the way, is Santiago, Chile, so South America. Now, this example is what you might find on a Regents-style question. They might give you a continent like this that is imaginary and have a bunch of different cities labeled on here with letters, and they're going to ask you to compare and contrast the climates at the different cities using your climate factors. You're going to have to do this in a lab, in your projects, and definitely on Regents questions and tests. So what I'd recommend you do on any test or when you're working on your lab or project, I know you all have your climate factors memorized now, but write them down because it's easy to get them confused or to forget one. So right away when you get your test question, or if you're working on a lab, write down your climate factors or have the list handy so that you can use it as a checklist. So here I've listed in red the climate factors that affect temperature. So when I'm trying to explain temperature, I need to look at those factors. And in blue, I've written down the 2 climate factors that affect precipitation. That's mountain ranges and wind belts. So here's how a question might be asked. Compare the climates at city C and city H. Okay, so I don't have any information really on elevation other than that these little marks here mean a mountain range. Neither H or C is in the mountain range, so I'm going to assume they're at the same elevation. So I'm not going to have, elevation is not going to be a big difference between them, so that's probably not going to be a dominant climate factor. How about latitude? Well, they're both about the same latitude. Looks like it's about 40 degrees north. So latitude won't be different from H to C, so latitude won't be a big climate factor. Distance from a large body of water, that might be a factor because H is on the coast and C is inland, so I'm going to have to look at that one. I don't have any information on ocean currents, so I'm going to skip that one. So temperature here, the only thing I could say is distance from a large body of water is going to make the climate at H have a milder climate and a smaller temperature range. And at sea, the temperature is going to have a bigger range because it's inland between winter and summer. So the range in temperatures there might be very different. H with a milder climate, C with a more extreme climate. Now that's temperature. Now what about precipitation? Well, I can look at wind belts and I can look at mountain ranges. I'm around 40 degrees, so not right at the 30-degree prevailing wind zone that is dry. And both of them are on the same latitude, so the wind belt there probably is not going to be different in terms of how it affects C and H. So it's really only mountain ranges, and I definitely have a mountain range in between them. So the question is, which of these cities is on the windward side and which is on the leeward side? Now, to answer that question, I have to go to my reference table and find out what direction the wind blows, the planetary winds, between 30 and 60 degrees. And I'm right around 40 degrees. So what direction would the wind be coming from? So if you look at your reference table, you'll see that between 30 and 60, I'm in the southwesterly wind belt, so my winds would be coming from the west. So that puts H on the windward side and C on the leeward side. So based on that, I would say H is going to be the wetter city, C is going to be drier. H, because it's close to a large body of water, will have a milder climate with less of a temperature change between winter and summer, and C will have a more extreme climate with more of a temperature change between winter and summer because it's inland. Another example that I could do would be between A and D. So what's a big climate factor between A and D? Both of them seem to be at the same elevation. I don't have one in a mountain range and one not. So elevation's not going to be a big climate factor. But latitude is. Latitude here I've got 0 and here I'm at 30. So 0 near the equator is definitely going to be hotter. Remember, latitude affects temperature only. So this is going to be a warmer climate. D is going to be a cooler climate. I don't have any information on ocean currents, and both of them are far from a large body of water. So I would expect both of them to have a range in temperature between winter and summer. So what about mountain ranges? No, I don't have any nearby there. Wind belts. Well, at 0 degrees latitude, I'm at a rising air wind belt, so that will make a wet city. Remember, wind belts affect precipitation. And D is closer to the 30-degree latitude wind belt, which would be a sinking air, and so this would be dry. So what can I say about A and D? A will be hot and wet. D will be cooler and drier. So that's an example of the kind of analysis you might have to do in a lab or on a test question. I hope that helps, and we'll see you next time.